In today's lab, I promise you will walk away with a changed perspective on what it means to actually work hard. Today we ask that question: are you actually working hard in whichever domain you are in? We explore psychological concepts like the effort illusion, cognitive load and bandwidth, nervous system bias, and we close the lab with a confronting experiment called the hard work audit. Welcome back to the Anatomy of Achievement. I'm your host, Kiara, psychology graduate and head scientist of this lab. Last week, we had a pre-lab episode which put practice under the microscope. I made it a separate pre-lab because, as the research confirms, the effects of deliberate practice are domain-specific. For example, deliberate practice results in skill acquisition in things like music, chess, martial arts, but the effects of deliberate practice are not as great in domains like business, career progression, content creation, etc. Today is the main lab, which considers practice and hard work across all domains. But when I reference practice or deliberate practice, all the information is in episode 8, Anatomy of Practice, pre-lab. We begin today's lab with 3 questions. I'll leave pauses so you can answer them out loud, just don't make it awkward. 1. Is your output matching your effort? 2. Is the work you're doing actually causing change in your domain? 3. Do you believe Meghan Markle when she said she had no idea who Harry's grandmother was? Honestly, I know it's irrelevant, but my friends are sick of hearing me rant about this. There is no way she went on a date with Harry and was like, haha, OMG, curtsy for your grandma, but why? Anyways, back to our topic. The first 2 questions I asked put you under the microscope. These questions strip away the chances of answering about your quote-unquote work and focuses on what the output of your effort is. The answer is simple. If the work you're doing is not causing change, you are not working hard. And feeling exhausted is not evidence of progress. Let's dissect. Part 1, the effort illusion. Let's start with the most common misunderstanding about hard work. The effort illusion is the main character and also my nemesis of this episode. Most people believe that if they are repeating something consistently with effort, they are practicing. But performance psychology draws a sharp line between repetition and deliberate practice. Our pre-lab, last week's episode 8, dives into the distinction between repetition and deliberate practice. If I can put this into a simple example, I have played piano for 20 years. For the last 10 years, I haven't had a teacher, but I still spend time at the piano regularly. In the last 10 years, I have not improved at all. It's one of the reasons I believe 2026 is the new 2016, because my piano skills are at the exact same level. The reason I progressed so much in the first 10 years and didn't progress at all in the last 10 years is because of the difference between deliberate practice and repetition. I've spent relatively the same amount of time at the piano in both decades. But in the first 10 years, my teachers beat my ass into practicing the things I wasn't good at, which, by the way, is both legal and encouraged in South Africa. Whereas in the last 10 years, when I sit at the piano, I do it for the enjoyment and for fluency, which means that I was just repeating what I was good at. After the lab last week, I spent half an hour every day working on the piano skills I'm not good at, drilled the parts I usually skip over, and therefore intentionally executed deliberate practice. I hated it in the moment, and it felt destabilizing, and I even cried once. This is actually what the research says should happen. Not crying, but it should feel destabilizing. As Big Dogs, Erickson and colleagues demonstrate, deliberate practice is purposeful, error-focused, and uncomfortable. When an activity becomes fluent, it creates an illusion of competence. Bjork and colleagues conducted a study in 2013 which showed that people mistake ease and smoothness for learning, even when it doesn't improve output or performance. Whether you did the experiment from last week's pre-lab or not, I want you to think about the week that's gone by when you were quote-unquote putting in the work. Did it feel familiar, affirming, identity protective? If the answer is yes, there's a strong chance you weren't actually working hard. You were rehearsing your competence, not building your competence. I mentioned before that effort illusion is my nemesis and has been in many of my skills in the past 10 years. That's because if your effort is actually repetition disguised as quote unquote practice, you are under the illusion that your effort is hard work. Maybe you and I have the same nemesis. Maybe you are Phineas and I am Ferb, and we're out here making an invention of repetition, and Dr. Doofenshmirtz, aka effort illusion, is in the background exposing our flaws in our invention, Part 2. Cognitive load avoidance and cognitive bandwidth. Let's talk about why cognitive fatigue gets mistaken for hard work. It's almost like exhaustion is a false badge of honor. The exhaustion I'm talking about is mental fatigue. When your cognitive bandwidth is all used up, what you're feeling is mental fatigue. Are you familiar with Barack Obama? He is one of the greatest examples of good use of cognitive bandwidth. Allow me to explain. Barack, when he was President of the United States, or POTUS, only had 2 suits and 3 ties. He reported that he minimizes every decision he possibly can in the rest of his life so that he can spend all of his mental energy and spend all of his decisions on the most important things, like running the country. If only the little orange man could have the same outlook. Anyways, when my man Barack said saving mental energy, what he is talking about is cognitive bandwidth. At a rudimentary level, you can explain it like this. Every morning, you wake up with a renewed amount of cognitive bandwidth. And as you make decisions, as you think, you are spending that cognitive bandwidth. You're stretching the cognitive bandwidth. If you are my target audience, you will have watched the movie In Time with Justin Timberlake. If you haven't watched it, consider that your pre-lab for next week. In this movie, it's a post-apocalyptic world. Every person has a time stamp on their arm, but it's digital. And when the time is up, they die. They get paid in time, but they also pay with time. You can compare cognitive bandwidth to Justin Timberlake's timestamp. JT wakes up with a certain amount of time or cognitive bandwidth on his arm, and he goes about his day, paying for food, transport, bills, and the time decreases. For your brain, every decision, thought, depletes your cognitive bandwidth for that day. Things that cost extra cognitive effort are multitasking, context switching, and micro decisions. Then by the end of the working day, you and I are like Justin Timberlake's mom in the movie, running dangerously low on cognitive bandwidth. But have we spent that time well? I know this is a stretch even for me, but let's imagine Barack Obama had one of those time countdowns on his arm representing his cognitive bandwidth, which reset every morning. Barack would be a great example of intentional spending. He had minimal micro decisions like what to wear, which tie to pick, and minimal multitasking. He has said he worked in blocks of tasks with minimal context switching. Why are we talking about Barack Obama and Justin Timberlake in the same context? Because you have that metaphorical timestamp of cognitive bandwidth every day. When it is depleted, you feel mentally exhausted. What's important is that the feeling of being mentally exhausted does not mean that you've worked hard. This is especially applicable to ambitious individuals. Research suggests when your cognitive bandwidth is drained by multitasking, context switching, and endless micro decisions, you feel mentally exhausted without having engaged in deep learning at all. But you're under the illusion that the effort has equaled hard work. Neuroscience research on cognitive fatigue in 2022 shows that mental tiredness often reflects resource depletion, not neural adaptation. Neural adaptation is the hard work, the kind of neuroplastic changes associated with learning and improvement. If there is one thing I can offer you today, it's that taking responsibility for your cognitive effort and intentionally spending your mental effort on deliberate practice or improvement will change the trajectory of your life. A quick note on cognitive effort. It is metabolically costly, so your brain tries to avoid cognitive load wherever possible because your brain functions as an energy regulation system. There's a very cool study by Cool with a K, which Loki makes them actually cool, which demonstrated that given a choice, people reliably avoid tasks that require greater cognitive effort, even if those tasks lead to better outcomes. So, like I said, changing your cognitive expenditure will be a very intentional and difficult process because your brain is also your nemesis. We just be out here collecting nemesis. We are the Powerpuff Girls, Phineas and Ferb, where you at? If you are a victim of the effort illusion, mental fatigue is the main misleading signal. You feel like you've worked hard because you're tired, but nothing has structurally changed. You're not tired because you're learning. You're tired because your attention is leaking everywhere. Go clean that shit up, man. Go clean that shit. Part 3, desirable difficulties versus exhausting difficulties. Now that we've dissected the effort illusion and the associated cognitive bandwidth and cognitive load avoidance, look at us understanding psychological concepts, we can now dissect difficulty. In the psychology of learning science, there are 2 distinct difficulties: desirable difficulty and exhausting difficulty. In 2011, Bjork and Bjork demonstrated that certain learning conditions can feel harder in the moment, but actually produce better long-term retention and transfer of learning. These include spaced practice, so not cramming, retrieval practice, retrieving the memories of the last neural pathway of the practice, and interleaving skills. People systematically misinterpret these strategies as ineffective because they feel slow, effortful, error-prone. Does that sound familiar? It should, because we spoke about deliberate practice at the beginning of the lab. Remember, deliberate practice feels uncomfortable, effortful. It made me cry. These are the same things. Bjork explains this as the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When learning feels hard, people assume it's not working, when the opposite is true. Why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because we have just explored that the feeling of exhaustion and being tired doesn't mean you're working hard. But we've also dissected that the kind of work that results in actual improvement feels difficult and uncomfortable, and in that way feels tiring. So both are difficult, both make you feel kind of tired. But what's the difference? Which difficulty is effort illusion and which difficulty is hard work? The answer is shockingly simple. Exhausting difficulty overwhelms the system. Desirable difficulty calibrates stress just enough to force mental reorganization. The main thing we're talking about here is change. If your work leaves you depleted but unchanged, it isn't hard work. Hard work is difficult because it stretches you. Part 4, pain, progress, and nervous system bias. While we're talking about difficulty, we might as well talk about pain, progress, and nervous system bias, am I right? Let's dissect why most people choose exhausting difficulty over desirable difficulty. Humans have a strong bias to equate discomfort or difficulty with progress, but the nervous system doesn't actually care about growth. It cares about predictability and energy conservation. It will choose familiarity before anything else. Your brain, your nervous system, is Bella in Twilight. When she has to choose between Edward and Jacob, both are kind of problematic, but she chooses the familiar, exhausting difficulty, Edward, over the desirable difficulty, Jacob. It's important to note that I was Team Jacob all the way. Happy to engage in healthy debate in the comments. Back to the research. Neuroscience research confirms that the brain, Bella, prefers familiar struggle, Edward, over adaptive strain, Jacob. Familiar struggle feels safe. Adaptive strain introduces uncertainty, errors, and temporary performance drops. Does this sound familiar to you? It should, because these are also the elements of deliberate practice. Why do people choose Edward instead of Jacob when Jacob is clearly hotter? Because Jacob threatens the existing system. An example of a specific neuroscience study demonstrating this is Robertson's work in 2018 on memory and neuroplasticity, which shows that learning often requires a phase of instability before improvement even appears. This instability feels threatening to the system, to the brain, which is why people instinctively avoid it. The nervous system pushes against difficulty that feels destabilizing, which is exactly what real hard work is made of. So people choose effort that hurts but doesn't change them, rather than strain that destabilizes performance, but it drives adaptation, it drives learning. Are you choosing difficulty because it feels productive, or choosing difficulty because it leads to change? Part 5, experiment. If there is anything this dissection has taught us, it's that you're going to spend that cognitive bandwidth either way. You're going to, quote unquote, suffer either way. But if you're being deliberate about how you're working, then the suffering will be worth it. My favorite book is called 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think. And if I had $1 for every time I've read it, I would have $17, which is not a lot of money, but it is impressive considering the book reading thing that I said. One of my favorite quotes by my Queen and Sovereign Brianna Wiest is, "Everything is hard in some way, but you choose your hard. You don't choose whether or not you'll suffer, but you do choose what you wish to suffer for." That leads us into our experiment for our lab, the part of the episode where I give you something tangible to work on or workshop based on the dissection we've done so far. Enter the hard work audit. BYO tissues if you don't have thick skin. I have 4 questions which you are going to ask yourself each night for the next 7 days, preferably looking in the mirror so it's nice and dramatic. If you can't answer these 4 questions clearly, you did not work hard that day. You chose Edward, you are not Barack Obama. If you can answer these questions clearly, then welcome to Team Legitimate Hard Work. Autocorrect. Question 1. What specific skill did I deliberately stress today? 2. Where did I receive feedback or expose error in my work? 3. Did today's effort change my capability or just my fatigue level? 4. If I repeated this day for a month, what would be objectively different? I'll leave you with some thoughts in case you have short-term memory loss and forgot everything we said in this episode. Hard work is not how tired you feel. It's how different you are after the effort. If your work is just protecting your competence, it's probably not hard work. If it's threatening your competence right before it improves it, then you are working hard. That concludes our lab for today. See you in the lab next week. Don't be late.